Ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Lavender with the New Orleans Poetry Festival. I'm also the proprietor of Lavender Inc. and Diálogos. And today we're here to kind of introduce 4 recent translated books of poetry. And we have in every case, we have the translators, and in some cases, we also have the authors here. And I'm going to, just to do a quick intro, I'm going to share the screen just to point out these bios, which I've lost. Here it is. No, that's there we go. Okay, so these are everybody's bios, and I'm just gonna paste this link into the chat. I'm not gonna read this whole thing. I'm just gonna introduce very quickly who we're talking about, who and what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about 4 books. The first one we're going to talk about will be Eduardo Chirinos, A Brief History of Music and 14 Forms of Melancholy, translated by Gary Racz. Eduardo died in 2016, and Gary has translated several of his works. Including others with Diálogos. And then we're going to go to Olivier Cadiot's Mage in Summer, translated by Anna Fitzgerald with an introduction by Cole Swensen. Olivier was going to be here today, but he had to cancel at the last minute, and so we have Anna and Cole introducing this work. Cole has also translated Olivier, and I think both Anna and Cole are currently working on translations, other translations of his work. And then we're going to do Sky Chess by Antonio Ángel Agudelo. Antonio is here, and so is translator Claudia Routon. And last but not least, we're going to do Giancarlo Huapaya's Subverse Workshop, translated by Ilana, Dann, Luna, and they're both here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this screen share. If any of you want me to share pages from the books, I can do that. I have them pulled up pretty much ready. So just let me know if you want me to share screens. I personally think that screen shares are sometimes distracting. So I think I'm not going to just automatically do it. But if you do want me to share anything, I will. So without further ado, I'm just going to go alphabetical by title, which means I'm going to turn it over first to Gary Racz to talk about Chirinos' 14 Forms of Melancholy. Gary, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. The Brief History of Music and 14 Forms of Melancholy is my 9th book, as I was telling Giancarlo, 9th book translations of the poetry of Eduardo Chirinos, who Bill said passed away sadly in 2014. Bill also earlier published While the Wolf is Around. That's from 2014. So I'm sorry. So
your screen was blank. You've got a very weak connection. Well, go ahead. You're back now, so yeah.
Okay. So I'll read 3 poems then. The first short one in Spanish and English. The first one is Cassandra, and it has an epigraph. Orquesografía Darbo 1588. That's not the composer of piece, Cassandra, but a French cleric from the 16th century who wrote on French social dances. So here's Cassandra. Si nadie contempla los astros cuando escucha tu voz, si nadie observa el futuro cuando lo miran tus ojos, búscame, aunque sea con serpientes, búscame y dime al oído tu triste verdad. Cassandra, the Orchesography of Arbo, 1588. If no one gazes on the stars while listening to your voice, and no one observes the future regarded by your eyes, come look for me, with serpents if need be, but come look for me, and whisper your sad secret in my ear. Bill asked me to say a few words about the book. So in the Preludio, the Prelude Brief History of Music, Eduardo writes that the book, and this is a quote, does not strictly speaking relate a history of music, much less try to present one through words. Nor does it propose that these pieces represent the totality of what we somewhat lazily refer to as classical music. Its aim is far more modest, to offer a framework of stories music tells those of us ever willing to listen. That said, the inspiration for the poems in A Brief History of Music do range from the 1300s anonymous Belbery piece, Dance of the Wind, to John Cage's Daughters of the Lonesome Isle. And I'll hasten to add here that Eduardo, who was a consummate music lover, lost much of his hearing as an infant. So I'll continue then with the second poem, Music for the Royal Fireworks, based on the piece by George Friedrich Handel. Castles of straw burn as children scamper around the fire, couples strolling arm in arm amid black and white masks, ember pigeons slice through the sky. The war is over in the plaza. Kings burn witches, burn women saints and dragons, the brave captain of cuirassiers too. The deer have fled. The fire consumes castles of straw, illuminating bodies, lighting up hands around the sky, golden, orange, hell color red. Tell me, what do you see? I see tongues of fire illuminating the night. I see your face blushing behind the veil. I see riders and mastiffs pursuing the fox amid the lavender. I see your legs burning, your eyes hell color red. As by now you must have surmised, the pieces of A Brief History of Music are ekphrastic poems. And in my introduction to the collection, I cite the critic Diego Otero, who enumerates 3 modes of ekphrasis in the volume. The first, I'm quoting, largely autobiographical, and thus springing from the poet's memory, relating the composer's personal and/or historical situation at the moment of composition, and the third, describing the conjured reactions of imagined listeners to a given piece. And I think that's the case in the last one I'll read today, Children's Corner, which is, of course, based on the suite by Claudia Corner. Come with me, my darling child, and listen to this. Tell me now, what do you see? I see my doll's long braids. I see her big round eyes and the snow dancing, its very white, very sad fluff falling over the meadow, the ocean, my pillow. I also see Dr. Gratis. Won't you please tell him to go away and never come back? Now, silly goose, close your eyes and tell me, what do you see? I see 9 ladies, each holding a cake. I see a cat dancing in African, but singing in English. It looks like a party, an artistic event with very small buildings and the Statue of Liberty. Beneath the moonlight, a Russian nursemaid kisses a young olive vendor. The little shepherd boy feels so alone. How sadly the rain falls on his cabin, his dappled cow, the pom-pom of his tail, its long eyelashes, your friend Stefan's bushy mustache. Tell me, Daddy, that tune you're playing, is it a serenade for my doll? That's it for me. Thank you. And a special thanks again to you, Bill.
Thank you, Gary. And I really appreciate it. Appreciate you sharing that with us. This was, well, I'll show you the book covers in a minute, but I think we'll just go ahead now to Olivier Cadiot's A Mage in Summer with Anna Fitzgerald and Cole Swensen. Can I turn it over to y'all?
Okay, I'll start. I actually started working on the translation in 2014. I was transitioning from technical translation into literary translation, and I asked a friend who I should translate among contemporary authors, and he said, Olivier Cadiot, de suite. And so I went out and got the book and read it, and there was something magical about it, even though I didn't grasp everything. So I submitted my grant application, I got the grant, and then I thought, now I have to translate this wonderful but a bit perplexing book. So I started reading, of course, Olivier's previous books, some of Cole's translations, but I also read books that Cadiot cited in interviews as influences, including Burroughs, Gertrude Stein, Faulkner, Mallarmé. And I met with Cadiot, and he's brilliant, and he was kind and generous and gave me the carte blanche to trust myself. And so finally, I got down to it. And another thing that I did was I had a friend read the book in French, and I recorded it and had him record it. And then I listened to it to get it's a very sonorous book. It's got a lot of music, and I wanted to sort of impregnate, just take it in. And that helped. But finding a publisher proved to be rather difficult. And finally, I found Bill. And so the translation was published in, I think, what was it, Bill, 2020?
I think it was, yeah, I think it was last year. Yeah, I think it was in
Last year.
2020. Mhm.
And I'll hand it over to Cole now, who wrote the preface to Imagine Summer.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Bill, for putting the panel together and for publishing the book and for asking me to write the intro. I love his work, obviously. I've translated 4 books of his. I love Anna's translation. It's just an amazing, amazing job. We were talking this morning before the panel and talking about tone, that Olivier's work is entirely driven by tone. And so to catch that same kind of tone, which has an element of humor to it, is really a job. But I also wanted just to talk a little bit about the book itself, the content and its relationship to truth and to the real. And it plays with certain autobiographical elements and certain other real facts, events, etc., and yet in such an exaggerated, overflowing way that it's always troubling, that distinction between the true and the real, the distinction between invention and truth. And a lot of his inventions are in themselves true. It has that kind of poetic truth that, you know, poetry cannot be put up to the truth test because it is its own truth. And yet also it has certain things such as the photograph that is on the cover and that opens the book. It's a Nan Goldin photograph. It exists, there it is. It exists in real life. Sharon, the woman who's the subject of the photograph, was a real person. That was a real event. And yet he incorporates it into this text in a way that fictionalizes it in a very complicated way. There are other elements. So we've got the river. On an for him, autobiographical note, Cadiot's family for several generations has had property on the Drône River, northeast of Bordeaux in France, and they've spent a large part of every year there, again, for generations. So this river is really, really important to this family and still is. I think that's where he's taking his son, Max, today, which is why he couldn't be here. But the river also seems to operate throughout the book as a kind of reminder of slippage, and things throughout the book are kind of always slipping. And one of the things in particular that keeps on slipping is the Mage. The Mage becomes this thing that's impossible to pin down, who it is, etc., what the role is. So there's a kind of sleight of hand or disappearing act that's always going on. Time also slips a lot throughout the book. Where are we in time is always an issue. Other autobiographical elements that I thought were really interesting, and this is the first, as far as I know, this is the first book he's done that really does speak autobiographically. Two of the principal characters, Elias Levi, was a historical character, 19th century, was a socialist and an occultist, and he was responsible for reviving occult studies in France in the 19th century. He was a huge influence on the Order of the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, Helena Blavatsky, all of these really important sort of mystical things. He wrote a couple of books. The titles are Histoire de la Magie and La Clef des Grands Mystères. So he was really saturated in this. Another character who's really important in the book is someone who was actually Olivier's great aunt. And her name was Marie Noémie Cadiot. And when she was 17 and at a very exclusive boarding school in Choisy-le-Roi, she eloped with Elias Levy, and they lived happily ever after, more or less, pretty turbulently, but nonetheless, and she became a very well-known and important feminist. She was also a scholar and a poet and a socialist, and she put her socialism and her feminism together and was actually kind of influential in the 1848 revolution. So she adopted a second name, which is Claude Vignon, a male name, so that she could better participate in the conversation, literary, but also political and social of her day. So if you have a chance and you're interested, she's a great character, and you can find out a lot just by Googling her. There are a couple of great articles up on her. The other kind of autobiographical or important character is Robinson. And Robinson, coming from Robinson Crusoe, is a character that goes through a lot of Olivier's work. And he is kind of echoing this loneliness that also reverberates throughout all of Olivier's work, and probably also has autobiographical connections. But Robinson, he's a haunter. He haunts these books. And again, symbol of loneliness or incorporation of loneliness, but also of self-determination and self-sufficiency. He is on an island, he is his own island, but he also constructs his entire life. So other elements too, there are two parents who die, he's tracking his father's death in section 3 or section 2, and tracking his mother's death in section 3. So again, it's an invitation to just consider the real, the true, the fictional, the poetic, where those divisions and distinctions lie. Thank you.
Thanks, Cole. I wonder if would one of you read just a little bit from the book? Maybe just the first little poem, or I'll read it if you don't want to.
Well, Anna's got the book. I'm 3,000 miles from my library, but Anna has the book. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Anna, you want to read the first poem?
You mean the first section that opens the book?
Yeah. Sorry,
Sure.
where he talks about the photograph. Yeah, just that
Yeah,
little bit.
sure, that's a good start. Saw a photo in the paper today, a color photo, woman in the water, a river, a man. She looks relaxed, holding still like that, arms crossed, her breasts pressed against her chest, her wet hair in short blonde coils. What's striking is how calm she seems, just someone in the middle of a green river, a fixed point in the current, seems to be thinking of nothing, just breathing. Now inhale and exhale, waist-high water, body turned into a barrier, just like that. It's something to see, 2 wrinkles of water accelerating around her hips. She's half bathed in coolness, half bathed in sun, perfect. The water is green. I checked the color value in another river. It's approximative. The camera selects the green by itself, the good enough green, and the image captures what anyone would feel, planted like that in the middle of the water. A wave of the wand, click, click, and I'm gone. She wraps up all alone in her arms, and instantly all thought disappears. A sudden idea, I'm a statue now, just like that. A barrier that everything turns around. Filaments of water, chains of cold molecules forming whips, like the lassoing aquatic grasses that colonize rivers in slow, undulatory sway, silvery water robe, and dragonfly green lame. She takes her place in heaven, equilibrium on the dot. I wish I were her. She seems content there, feet firmly planted on the bed of flat stones, so content she forgets her body. No need to present herself, nothing to declare. She's finally someone, unisex, in her prime, her hips soft and white, her shoulders tanned, except for a few pink peels, like a farmer. A woman ends up into a man, or vice versa. She isn't swimming, she's soaking, immersed, restoring. At work on her well-being, a carpenter removes the sweat and sawdust from his torso. A hunter undresses in the cold water. A conquistador stops to eat his lunch. Saint Sebastian at peace before the arrows. Go ahead, close your eyes. It crackles all around. Plop, Milky Way, magnesium. A green cutout is imprinted in the dark. A burning outline in the shadows. A little character crosses the river while the shape keeps telling us, of course it's her. Why, yes, it's him. The minimum threshold below which you can't recognize anyone. X in the river. I should draw a picture. A sketch as simple as music heard at a distance, across a courtyard, through a window. Can't make out the instruments anymore, only a voice that insists. I rise, I fall, I return, I start, I loop back, I disappear, I augment, I repeat. You say, but is it good to be reduced to an automaton? Of course it's good, of course it's good, but why? Why is that everyone's dream? It's always been the dream, an automaton that cries out, why? How is that the dream? Would you like me to read a little bit of that in French?
Well, maybe in
Maybe later.
actually we're doing okay for time. Why don't you just maybe read the first paragraph, or you pick a portion of it.
Okay, maybe I'll just read the first paragraph.
So we can get an idea of the sound.
Sure.
About, yeah.
Vu une photo dans le journal en couleur, une femme au milieu de l'eau, une rivière, un homme. Elle a l'air bien immobile comme ça, bras croisés. Elle compresse ses seins, cheveux moulés, torsadés, courts, blonds. Ce qui est frappant, c'est son calme. C'est juste quelqu'un au milieu de la rivière verte, point fixe dans le courant. On dirait qu'elle ne pense à rien. Elle souffle. Allez, on inspire et on expire. L'eau jusqu'à la taille, on fait barrage de son corps comme ça. C'est beau à voir. Deux rides d'eau s'accélèrent autour de ses hanches. Elle a une moitié du corps au soleil, moitié au frais. C'est parfait. L'eau est verte. Je suis allée vérifier dans une autre rivière cette valeur de vert. C'est approchant. L'appareil choisit le vert tout seul, le suffisamment bon vert. Cette image réussit à traduire ce qui ressentirait n'importe qui planté là au milieu de l'eau. D'un coup de baguette, clic, clic, allez, je m'arrête. Elle se prend toute seule dans les bras et instantanément, elle ne pense à rien. Une idée subite, ah, je deviens une statue, comme ça, je fais barrage. Et ça s'organise autour, des filaments d'eau, des chaînes de molécules froides, enfouées, à l'image des herbes en lasso qui colonisent les rivières au ralenti, en ondulant. Robe d'eau argent et lamée vers libellule. Elle s'installe. Elle est au paradis, pile à l'équilibre.
Great, thanks. I thought it was interesting. I had to go ahead and put the cover back up there because, for one thing, I had to work really hard to get that photograph for the cover. It's a very famous photograph by Nan Golden, and also I was just noting how much of an ekphrasis based on that photo, that first poem is, and how he kind of uses that ekphrasis to start the book and sort of get it going. So I thought it was interesting, and it tied in with what Gary was talking about. Okay, so now we're going to move to Sky Chess and Antonio Agudelo and Claudia Routon. So do y'all want to take it over?
Sure.
Hey.
Antonio, les voy a describir un poco sobre lo que habíamos hablado. Y luego, Antonio, what he wanted to talk about the book. He was very precise. I told him we were asked to look at what elements were in the book, and he was very precise in saying that a political and ethical manifesto. And now this book, Sky Chess, is a compilation of 3 of his books. Lyrical poems, haiku, and there is a definite thrust of energy, I would say, I would say he really wants to emphasize the manifesto. So I was looking at some poems I thought we would read and share with you, and he was emphatic that he wanted to read and share with you a poem called La Casa Ética, a house of ethics. And this is what he views himself as a poet to be, is a champion of aesthetics and ethics. And that in this mode, there is an experimental role. Interestingly and beautifully, Giancarlo Mestre, who's also a poet and an artist, has illustrated the book. And Diálogos, we just can't believe it, but we have these gorgeous color illustrations by Giancarlo Mestre that is someone to look at. So one of the things that beauty and as what he views as the role of the poet. The poet has to bring beauty and justice, and this is the dual purpose of his poetry in any case. Thank you, Bill, for showing those beautiful illustrations. So I think what we'll do is I will ask Antonio to read some of his, to read the poem in Spanish. It is quite long, so I'm going to ask him to cut it short, and I will read just a bit of it in English, and we'll proceed from there. Bueno, Antonio, si quieres leer La Casa Ética, ¿me oyes? ¿Me escuchas? ¿Sí?
Sí, sí.
Antonio.
Pero puedo decir un...
Sí, vale.
Sí, te
pero
escucho.
creo que no se puede. Mira, es que no se puede leer el poema completo, porque como son 5 minutos, si se puede, la mitad. ¿Vale?
Ok.
We're
Vale.
going to read half of the poem. It's 3 pages long. It takes 5 minutes. So we're going to cut the poem short, but I think you will get a good sense of the declaration or the that he is making as a poet and as an activist. Muy bien.
Empiezo. ¿Puedo empezar?
Sí, ahora sí.
La casa ética. La poesía es una casa ética donde el fulgor y la fiebre es algo más hermoso que el sacrificio del fuego. La poesía es un lugar del sueño donde crece la rosa que sostiene el mundo. Lo importante es cambiar el mundo porque es posible y necesario. La poesía es una isla de pájaros transparentes, un solo pez en el agua y 3 Córdobas de hermosura. La poesía lleva al sastre de Apolinar la ropa de su padre para que le ponga un remiendo amarillo. La poesía es pasar una temporada en el infierno o la hora izquierda de Dios, el ruido del apocalipsis. La poesía es el vagabundo que cruza el fracaso del ritmo y que pierde el corazón en la tumba de Paun. La poesía bajo el aroma caliente de la calabaza de Pentecostés. Oye la trompeta de Lázaro, lee la carta de la revelación y los anillos giran hacia el calabozo de los profetas. La poesía son todas las recompensas del día esperando en la puerta del sueño. El pueblo es pan y violín, los ángeles sin horca, el club paraíso. La poesía camina entre los cerezos donde sigue brotando la sonrisa de los muertos que tocan el piano a cuatro manos. La poesía bajo la telaraña del apocalipsis, los ancianos que se pelean por un garbanzo en la frontera del ser o no ser. La poesía es un manual de supervivencia en el Polo Norte que dice no a la intoxicación fascista que niega la cultura y la libertad del espíritu. La poesía es el cerebro de la primavera contra la pena de muerte, un chaleco blanco en la mesa del mar y pastelitos tricolores. La imaginación garantiza la abolición de lo injusto. La poesía es Walt Whitman peinado hacia la derecha, hacia la izquierda, calvo del todo, y las monedas que vienen de América. La poesía es Greta Garbo, que lleva un puñado de tierra para la cama y pan para el pan.
Muy bien.
La poesía
Paramos
trabaja
ahí.
un segundo. La poesía trabaja el agua envenenada hasta que se puede beber y transforma el veneno en medicina. La poesía es la conciencia ética de la otredad, lo que da consuelo y esperanza y nos salva de la muerte. La poesía es revelación y misterio. Solo el misterio nos hace vivir, solo el misterio. La poesía son los pájaros de Pukin, destinados a la salvación, el proyecto espiritual del nuevo mundo, la gran revolución cultural. La poesía es el nacimiento intelectual de la humanidad. La poesía cambia de sitio los armarios. Lo importante es cambiar el mundo, porque es posible y necesario.
Fenomenal. Muchas gracias. So he's read
Thank you.
probably the first page and sections of the second and sections of the third. And Bill, you have kindly put this up, which is probably a very useful thing to do. Would you like me to read some in English or maybe just a bit?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I'll just start with the beginning, really. A house of ethics. Poetry is a house of ethics where brilliance and frenzy are more beautiful than the fire sacrifice. Poetry is a dream place where the rose grows, sustaining the world. Changing the world is what is important because it's possible and necessary. Poetry is an island of translucent birds, one lone fish in the water, and 3 córdobas of gorgeous. Poetry brings to the tailor of Apollinaire her father's clothing to stitch a yellow patch. Poetry is spending a few hours with the dead, or that 1 minute without God, the noise of the apocalypse.
Excellent. Well, that was fabulous. I think that was a great introduction to this work, and thank you both. Let's go ahead and move on to Giancarlo Huapaya's Subverse Workshop with Ilana Luna and Giancarlo. If y'all want to take it away.
Hi, thank you. Giancarlo, you there? Yes. Okay.
Aquí estoy.
Okay. So, you know, we're going to read a couple of poems because I think more than anything, when we try to approximate the language of experiment, and that's kind of what we're talking about today, is different sorts of experimentation with language. The best thing we can do is hear it. That said, I just would like to say that one of the most rewarding parts about translating experimental poetry with a living poet is that we can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And so in our process, in Giancarlo's and my process of bringing this book, which it had been published many years before in Spanish, was to read and to translate and to read again. And we would read in the living room, hanging out in Phoenix when he lived there, where I am. And we would then publish a version of one poem, and then we would change it. And so part of it has been a really exciting process, and we are really grateful to Bill for making a space for this. Giancarlo, do you want to say anything before we read?
Just thank you so much to you and to Bill for publishing this beautiful book. And yeah, we can start. First Spanish, right?
First Spanish.
A. Flexionen el abanico luminoso y mojen el pie que simula la arritmia. Víbrenlo y salpiquen. La tita indeleble desinflamará los coágulos. Vuelvan del lado más festivo de sus torsos y únanse sin escoger. Si el peso se los permite, podrán saltar así o voltear cuando les sacudan sustancias plateadas. Ahora canten y conviértanse en un embudo. Inviertan los párpados cuando sientan el conocimiento en los vellos. Sus respuestas serán autorretratos. No desatiendan lo que les baja entre los muslos y gotea desde la luz. Toda construcción será sostenida por la velación de sus medios. Mientras mutan, ejerciten el ombligo como una retina. No lo deben desaparecer porque la dimensión y la dinámica empiezan por mirarlo. Ahora mírame y pregúntate qué posibilidades soy. Si pueden definirlo, retiren sus inhalaciones y expulsen las vibraciones del sádico disfraz. Si no, deberán mantenerme como una extensión cruda e inerte y preguntar a cada animal su imperativo al colgarse de alguno de sus dioses. Disfrutarán sus contracturas. Tú y tú se conmoverán al comparar el poema con una película post-porno. Los demás los vestirán con la última representación que rechazaron en la intimidad. Enuncien la singularidad de lo flexible. De eso se trata el festival. Tú puedes llamarle de la forma en que lo sueñes, incluso de la forma onomatopéyica. Nuevamente, como coro litúrgico, compongan con un ordenador de acuerdo a su metempsicosis y trasládenme sus características hereditarias. Yo quedaré encendido con LEDs de cabaret y ustedes rebanarán pepinillos encima de sus rostros. Recuéstense junto a un charco orgánico. Sumerjan la lengua y escriban con ella. Soy un trasplante, soy un traspaso, soy un traslado y X. Alteren el ozono e inflamen el tubo. Esa máscara les procurará labios y ojos sobresalientes. Alteren su aseo. Toquen el poema antes que se seque y negativícense en cada parpadeo. Esta inversión contribuirá con la terapia de estilización. Dilaten y piensa por dónde sería mejor tu desmontaje. Los objetos sexualizados recogen nuestro activismo y se frotan contra el aprendizaje. A esta distancia ya sabes qué ropas interiores huelen a multiplicación.
So just before I read the English, the first poem in this subverse workshop, I just want to read you a clip from my translator's note, which explains kind of what we're looking at. And Subverse Workshop is a collection of erotic, monstrous political poems. The workshop is constructed like an abecedary in which each letter is a space where processes and performances are developed involving biopolitical relations, microeconomies, neo-mythologies, sexual technologies, hybrid aesthetics, and elastic concepts that are activated through mechanisms of evolution and mutation. So that sort of gives you an idea that each of the poems in this book goes from A to Z and explores different possibilities of how bodies might relate to one another. A. Flex the luminous fan and wet the foot that simulates arrhythmia. Vibrate it and splash. The indelible ink will calm the inflammation of blood clots. Come back from the more festive side of your torsos and come together at random. If your weight allows, you can jump like this or turn around when they shake the silver substances on you. Now sing and become a funnel. Turn your eyelids inside out, and when you feel the knowledge in your hairs, your answers will be self-portraits. Don't ignore what's sliding down your thighs and what's dripping from the light. Every construction will be supported by the betrayal of its means. While you mutate, exercise your belly button like a retina. Don't let it disappear because the dimensions and dynamics begin with seeing it. Now look at me and ask yourself, what possibilities am I? If you can define it, withdraw your inhalations and expel vibrations from their sadistic disguise. If not, you should keep me as a crude and inert extension and ask each animal its reason for hanging on to one of its gods. You'll enjoy the spasms. You and you will be removed when comparing the poem to a post-porn flick. The rest of you will dress them up in the last performance that you rejected in private. Enunciate the singularity of flexibility. That's what this festival is about. You can call it whatever you dream up, even if it's onomatopoetic. Once again, like a liturgical choir, compose with a computer according to your metempsychosis and transfer your heritable characteristics to me. I'll stay lit up with the cabaret LEDs, and you all will slice pickles over your faces. Lie back down next to an organic puddle, sink your tongue in and write with it. I'm a transplant, I'm a transfer, I'm a translation, and X. Alter the ozone and inflame the tube. That mask will give you lips and bug eyes. Alter your hygiene, touch the poem before it dries, and neutralize yourselves with each blink. This reversal will contribute to stylization therapy. All dilate now and think about where dismantling would be best for yourself. The sexualized objects collect our activism and they rub up against learning. From this distance, you already know which underwear smells of multiplication. So you sort of see the beginnings of this, and we want to give you one more poem just to have as a counterpoint, and it's towards the end of the collection. It's poem S, poema S, Giancarlo.
S. Quieren la letra cada vez que terminen. El reloj es la ilusión óptica del monumento. Buscan la respuesta en las próstatas de las velas encendidas. Las heces perpendiculares que gravitan biónicas en sus lunas menguantes, mientras les grito a los grillos ruinas de constelaciones, ahora se adhieren a sus nubes como ráfagas de recuerdos. Esta noche las historias terminarán en las desgracias de los sentenciados, mutilarán arlequines de crímenes no resueltos. Con los desechos se nombrarán y atacarán entre ustedes. En los ganglios existen nuevos cráteres de devastadora lava soñadora. Esa S recorrerá las vocales de tus aullos, los terciopelos. Someterá la primera letra de tu nombre, la paseará atada, le ordenará que lama las flemas y la alimente desde su boca. Reciban las instrucciones de aguante en el hecho de trasfondo, destrucción de sus vanidades gracias al lengüeteo de sus almendras, voraz tacle en el viento. Escondan los códigos por descifrar en el indiscreto lector. Fugaces fósforos rugirán contra la oscuridad. Esa S también es el látigo que caerá pesadamente en tu destino. Los animales fornicarán en el grafiti mientras se enmarca la seda en el interior de tus dientes. Los cerros son las curvas de los cuerpos eróticos de una cumbia guerrillera.
S. Spin the letter each time you finish. The clock is the optical illusion of the monument. Look for a response in the prostates of lit candles. The perpendicular S's that gravitate bionic in their waning moons, while I yell ruins of constellations at the grasshoppers. Now they stick to the clouds like bursts of memories. Tonight the stories will end in the disgrace of those sentenced. You will mutilate harlequins of unsolved crimes. With the remnants, you will name and attack each other. In your lymph nodes, there exist craters of devastating lava dreams. That S will traverse the vowels of your howls, the velvets. It will suppress the first letter of your name. We'll walk it on a leash. We'll order it to lick the phlegm and to feed it from its own mouth. Receive the instructions to stay in the background scene. Destruction of your vanities thanks to the licking of your almonds. Voracious flying kick in the wind. Hide your yet undeciphered codes in the indiscreet reader. Fleeting matches will bellow against darkness. That S is also the whip that will fall heavy on your destiny. The animals will fornicate in graffiti while the silk marks the inside of your teeth. The hills are the curves of erotic bodies of a gorilla cumbia. Thank you.
Well, that too is fabulous. So this has been really great. Do we have anybody want to ask a question, continue the conversation, comments,
I have a
anything
question.
you like? Sure.
Or do I have my camera? Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, I was going to ask Giancarlo. Well, first off, I should say all the work is just stunning, really stunning work. So compliments to the press and to all the authors and translators. It's just like really thrilling to see, you know, new work coming out like this. I wanted to ask Giancarlo, and maybe, well, I don't know how you handle the translation stuff, but can Giancarlo hear me? Yeah, okay. Mi pregunta es los toques de surrealismo. Bueno, yo no sé si tú vas a llamarlos surrealismo, pero algunos gestos de cosas que son mal puestos o puestos en un sentido diferente. Si esto es parte del proyecto de derrumbar la ideología o del proyecto de una cosa de revolución en letras. You want me to translate the question?
I understood.
Probably.
But the English speaking people.
Oh,
It would be
yeah.
good if you could summarize in English.
Yeah, just basically I mean, I hate to use the word surrealism, but because it's a school, etc. But more those touches that you could call surrealistic or whatever, because they're really quite daring and quite interesting. But whether that's part of the more of the style or if that's part of a sort of like you know, revolution of letters.
Ya, lo primero es que la forma en sí ya es un discurso, ¿no? Entonces, a través de la forma, tú puedes decir muchas cosas. En Subverse Workshop, Taller Subverso, también hay una propuesta acerca de lo fragmentario, que es lo que tú piensas. Tú no piensas como hablas o no piensas, digamos, necesariamente como escribes, porque tú al escribir, pues, generas un concepto, una unión sintáctica a partir de las reglas de la escritura, ¿no? O el marco de la escritura. La escritura siempre es una limitación o tiene un marco que no es suficiente para expresar muchas cosas, ¿no? Entre ellas los sentimientos. Entonces, de alguna forma, esta fragmentación intenta también ir en contra de la escritura, ¿no? Digamos que no es algo evidente, aunque también, digamos, el libro tiene bastantes elementos y dentro de estos elementos podríamos encontrar el elemento metatextual, ¿no? Porque creo que o sea, particularmente yo no escribo olvidándome de que estoy en una página, ¿no? No estoy en una realidad, no, o sea, no pretendo transferir una fidelidad. Y en este sentido, pues la fragmentación es parte de eso, ¿no? Porque nosotros pensamos fragmentadamente, ¿no? Nuestros recuerdos son así, ¿no? No hay una completa articulación. Otra de las cosas es que también este libro tiene una experimentación con el lenguaje. O sea, tampoco no sé si llamarle necesariamente experimentación, meterlo dentro de eso, pero sí tiene una exploración, ¿no? Una exploración con el lenguaje a partir de distintos elementos. Uno de estos elementos, como tú lo has mencionado, puede ser el surrealismo o uno de estos movimientos, pero también creo que parte de sus influencias en el lenguaje es el neobarroco setentero, ¿no? Que es latinoamericano básicamente, que tiene, digamos, entre sus mayores representantes a partir de los 60, 70 a Néstor Perlonger, ¿no? Roberto Echavarren, que sé que es amigo de Bill, y Bill también lo ha publicado en Diálogos. Y en Perú, digamos que Rodolfo Inostroza, ¿no? Entonces, ese es, digamos, otro elemento, pero también hay otro elemento que también es muy importante, que es el elemento de la performance, ¿no? Each letter is a kind of performance, ¿no? Or process of construction to create something, ¿no? O sea, tampoco hay una claridad de qué cosa, cuál es la creación, pero cuál es la creación después de cada letra, ¿no? Pero sí, digamos que hay un camino para convertirte o para mutar, ¿no? En algo más. Ilana, tú.
I'll
Yes.
paraphrase quickly. So I'll try. So what Giancarlo's saying is that the form itself, obviously is an aesthetic and ethical position when we take on a text, and it can say a lot in and of itself. And this particular text uses the form of fragmentation, and it's something that I mentioned in the translator's note if you guys want to read more about that. But he also mentions that while surrealism, as mentioned in the question, is one of the elements that he explores in this, he said he hesitates to call it experimental, but it's an exploration. I would say it's experimental, but he can hesitate on that one. That yes, surreal, like imagery can be part of that, but that's really part of this, the way that we think. We don't think in a linear manner the way that we write, and that he's always aware that he is sort of a subject in front of this white page. And so he wanted to replicate sort of the fragmentary nature and the dreamlike nature of the way our minds work, rather than how we've put them into order on a page. I think I'm getting that more or less, Giancarlo, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then finally, he says he doesn't want us to forget that there's this other piece that's a really important influence on his work, which is the neo-Baroque of the 70s in Latin America. And he mentioned several of the names of those proponents in Peru and in other parts of Perlonger and Inostroza, among others, that are influences on his work. And I would just conclude by saying that it was, in some ways, very exciting to be able to approach a text that doesn't ask to mean something all the time. And so, when we think about, translating for meaning or for sound or for the shape, the form of it, or the rhythm, it gave me a lot of freedom as a translator to be able to not necessarily require the text to make sense. And so I was able to focus on other elements that I was attempting to find parallel structures to recreate in English, but it's in an English of almost 15 years later. And so that was something that I was very aware of as a translator, that what these sort of fragmentary thoughts were in the early 2000s take on new and kaleidoscopic meanings as they're sort of cycled through in an English in the, the 2020s. So that's all I have to say about that one. Thank you.
I love the way you tied in the translation and your translation work with the answer to the question, with his answer to the question. That was really beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else want to raise any issues?
I actually had a question for Anna about her transition from from technical translation to literary translation, and this sort of leap of faith. I was wondering if she wanted to talk a little bit about that. Tell us about how that sort of took place with this particular book.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I didn't leave behind technical translation, and in a way that allowed me more time and freedom because I had my livelihood elsewhere. Since then, I've gone on and translated another novel by Klosowski, and I like to have time to do things because often in technical translation, you don't have time. You have to go quickly. There's a deadline. And that's something I value in literary translation. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes. I mean, it's always interesting. And it's something that I talk about a lot too, is that at least for me, I'm not sustaining myself with literary translation. I'm a professor. So it does. I think I agree with you that having the luxury of your livelihood elsewhere makes it so that you can really take on projects that are passion projects, that are exciting, that are meaningful, and that need to be in the world. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I get asked all the time. People ask me, where do you find this work? Where do you or where do you find your translators? As if I, as the publisher, would find the work in the original and then say, oh yeah, this is great. Now let me just get somebody to translate it. And sometimes they're surprised when I tell them, well, it finds me. I said, almost always it is the translator that brings the project to me. And, so the translation, really has become an art. I was just recalling the other day, like when I was a kid, I can remember some of the very first bilingual books I saw were maybe a book of, say, Rimbaud's verses, and it would have the French original in the lines. These are like his sonnets and things. And then the translation would be a footnote in prose. Do you remember ever seeing those? Yeah, very strange when they didn't even, they didn't even think that the translation was, it shouldn't even mimic the poem nor attempt to reproduce the sound nor the sort of, the aesthetic of it or anything like that. And the other thing I just wanted to bring up and kind of point out is that two of the 4 books we're talking about here, the authors and translators live or lived in the same country, and the authors were are or were pretty well fluent in English, but not fluent to the degree of writing poetry, but certainly fluent to the point where they could discuss it, and they just preferred to write in Spanish. And I'm talking about, of course, Giancarlo and also Eduardo Chirinos. I don't know if Gary is still here or if his connection failed him, but I know that he worked with Eduardo personally when Eduardo was still alive, and then and so the translation becomes. Well, let me just digress and say, the other day in the other translation panel, in one of the other translation panels, I brought up the notion of face à face, and how did people feel about facing page translations, which, as you can see from the screen shares, I tend to favor. And I was kind of surprised at the negative the negative response, or the degree of negativity to the response. I understand it. I understand the notion, but I mean, more and more I feel like that my poems or these books are, while they're entirely for an American audience, they're for an increasingly bilingual American audience, or you know, of primary English speakers, but also, you know, I mean, there are a lot of Spanish speakers in our audience today, you know. Well, that's about all I have to say. Anybody else want to bring anything up?
I just wanted to touch a little bit on that idea of translation, and it seemed to be, Bill, that this is maybe what you were implying, can almost be a collaboration between the writer and the translator. And I think, Anna, you worked a lot with Olivier, and when I've worked on his work, it's a conversation. And so I love that elasticity and the sense of collaboration and friendship that I think somehow gets echoed intangibly in the resulting work.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Donald, you got any questions? I'm just joking with Don Wellman, who just came in. You're muted. Don, you're muted. Okay. Well, if nobody else has anything to bring up, I guess we'll go ahead and close. I want to thank you all again, and encourage everybody to come to the rest of the events. We only have one more week of events. It's gone by surprisingly quickly. It has not been work, really. It's been totally fun. I've done this almost every afternoon and or evening in April, and all the sessions have been great. So anyway, join us. We have one coming up in just 45 minutes, Poetry in an Age of Corruption and Hope, I believe it's called. And with Mark Statman and the incredibly talented Nancy Dixon and Todd Edgerton and others. But anyway, so that's coming up in just 45 minutes. And then tomorrow, I would really encourage you to come to the Poets of Ashe Cultural Arts Center here in New Orleans. We'll have 5 really remarkable poets from this from the center, and I think you'll find it pretty fascinating. So thank you all, and
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
You.
Bravo.
Bye.